good morning and welcome back to the workshop with Tom Christie. And this is session 2 of carving a Northern Common Eider pear. In session 1, we got the head roughed out on the drake. We did some reference material checks. In this session, I'm going to work on the hen's head. I'm not going to duplicate all of the carving scenes of the hen's head because it's just a lot of the same type of process. But I will come back when I get this shaped up, and we'll talk about some of the very specific things that are different between the drake and the hen's head, and you can see that in the round. And then we'll move into detailing the bills on both birds. If you're enjoying my channel, please hit the subscribe button. That really helps me out, and I want to keep this channel with free resources for people that may want to carve wildfowl of all types. Welcome back. Okay, I have the two heads rough carved, and I just thought we'd take a second, take a close look. Very similar geometry, just the bill is shorter and comes to a sharp point up here. And this side structure is not as prominent on the female. So there's, in the paint, there will definitely be a change in the flow of the feather direction as those come together. These feathers tend to go back and down, whereas these feathers are wrapping around and going down. So there's definitely a little bit of an indication there of a similar trait, but not nearly as prominent. So let's start doing some layout work. I want to separate the lower mandible from the upper, sketch in the bill details, and get to work on those. First, we'll separate the upper and lower mandible, and it's a line here and a little bit of an upturn as it meets the nail and then back down again. It's kind of a subtle thing, but pretty important in the look. And I'm just using my knife to score along both sides. And this will give us a nice clean separation line between the upper and lower mandible. Same on the drake. You don't have to go too deep, maybe a 1/16 of an inch. Then I'm going to make a cut carefully along the lower mandible here, and then go underneath. And I'm going to score this lightly multiple times so I don't push through the wood too quickly. And so I don't have to use as much force as I would if I'm trying to get this all done in one cut. Anytime I'm using a knife, go slow. Almost free. I think I have to go a little deeper down here where that upturn is on the end of the bill. Go at it from this direction. There we go. So you can see that gives us a little bit of a shelf that catches the light, and then I'm going to round that lower mandible. But I'll do that same thing on the hen as well. Let's take a close look at the nail on the drake. There's quite a groove there, and the nail is raised up, and from the top down, it's kind of oval shaped. You can see the tip of the bill angles in, so we're going to want to carve that feature in. So I'm going to use my dividers to size up the bill nail, give myself a guideline on the carving. Try to get that oval shape. I'm going to start with this little 1/8 inch cylindrical ruby bit, and I've got the nail penciled in, and I'm going to cut a little bit of a groove around the perimeter of the nail on each side primarily. And then after I cut the groove, I'm going to round into the nail and then lower the material on this side of the nail and blend that back in. Same thing on this side. Again, the nail is pretty large on an eider for all the feeding that it does, the crustaceans. Just rounding that off. And I'll spend a little bit of time just refining this, but that's basically how you define the nail. I'll have to do some fine sanding when it's all said and done. You can see the shadow there cast. I'm going to speed the video up here. Just further refining that. Now I used a pencil and take a look at symmetry. And using the pencil kind of helps clarify where I need to do additional grinding, because the pencil will hit the bumps and show up the gaps that still need to be cleaned up. Now I'm going to do some hand sanding, probably 150 grit sandpaper, smooth things out, and then we'll move on to the rest of the build details. Got the hen's nail defined. Now I'm going to go in the lower mandible where we removed wood, and I just need to clean that up, and that lower mandible is rounded. And I've got that little 1/8 inch ruby bit, cylindrical bit, taking the edge off that lower mandible and then blending that, making sure we have good definition around the end where the upper and lower mandible meet. I just want to make sure I have a nice clean line. After the knife work, there's normally a little bit of residual that needs to be cleaned up. And then do some light sanding down here. And I'm actually rounding the lower side of the upper mandible while I'm sanding that lower mandible as well. Just get rid of any remaining tool marks and blend that into the nice corner of the cheek there. Just want to look at bill structure, the nostril enclosures. You can see this is kind of a wide set nostril, and they're kind of in a vertical position. So we're going to want to carve them that way. I'm going to rely on my pattern for the nostril opening, since I have the other variation in the study bill. I can use that for some of the structure and detail, but the position of the nostril will get positioned on the carving on both birds, and then do some carving. All right, I've got those penciled in very roughly, and I think the first thing I want to do is create this vertical with the distance between the nostril being a 1/2 inch. So we'll dig down a little on either side of that. Then we can work on the nostril enclosures. I'm going to start with this pyramid shaped ruby bit, and it's got a rounded end on it. And I'm just going to follow that 1/2 inch width between the nostrils and create a little bit of remove some material down here. So create a little bit of a concaved area so that I can form a vertical nostril in that pocket that I'm creating on both sides. And this ruby bit with the pyramid shape lets me dig in, but then I can use the side of it to blend back out. And form those two pockets before we start working on the nostril enclosure details. So I'll speed this up a bit. Okay, this is at 2 times speed. Just continuing to develop that and blend it into the surrounding area so you can see that shadow. I'm going to do the same thing on the drake. Maybe a little better view here of this process. That's getting pretty close, and I'll end up doing some sanding here to smooth everything back out before we begin the detailed carving. I keep taking that a little deeper at a time so that I have enough vertical distance there to create the nostrils. That's looking pretty good. All right, now I've penciled in the nostril enclosures, and I'm going to use this very small ruby cylinder and begin cutting a groove, outlining that, and also cutting a groove that I understand is the way the salt gets discharged from the nostril and runs down this groove out to the tip of the bill and the nail. So it's a little hard to see here, but I'm just going around the nostril enclosure and then defining that groove. Very characteristic of the eider. And then rounding that off in both directions. So you can see it there, but it's a crease. So again, going around the perimeter and then cutting that groove out to the nail. Just checking my reference to make sure I've got that position correctly. And then I'm digging in under the nostril enclosure so that we have a little bit of structure there, and then rounding that off so that when I put the nostril in place, you'll be able to see the enclosure and the shape of the enclosure. I'm going to speed the video up here a bit. This is at 2 times speed. I'm just working to develop the shape of the nostril enclosure and blend that into the surrounding area with this little ruby bit. One of the advantages of working on the hen and the drake's head at the same time is this. You can stick with the same bit you've got in the grinding equipment and go back and forth between the two heads without having to change bits, or, you know, while things are working, you can stay right on it and do both heads. So I'm cutting that groove. Now I'm going to change bits and go to this little flame shaped ruby bit, which has a sharp point on the end and is rounded on the sides, and that is really a good bit to get in and around these nostrils and nostril enclosures and clean them up and create a little bit more depth, especially below the nostril. There's not much definition on an eider on the top side of the nostril. It kind of blends into that bridge across, the half-inch bridge between the two nostrils on the top side, but definitely can see a little bit of a ridge down below. So I'm carving that in and then doing the same on the drake. This little flame shape is really good for cleaning things up like this. And then I'll have to do a light sanding. You can see I can use the point of that flame to go in and really define that crease. All right, I think I've got those shaped up pretty well. We'll do some sanding to smooth things out before we put the nostril holes in place. Now I'm going to use the very small spherical bit here. It's a ruby bit, and go in and create the nostril holes. And go at this slowly so I don't slip and ruin all the work that I just put into the enclosures. And these nostrils tend to be larger in front and they get a little more narrow towards the back. A good sized nostril. You can see I'm getting a good grip on things so that I don't slip at all when I'm doing this very fine work. And I put those in about 1/16 of an inch, so there's a good shadow cast on the nostril from light above, but not much deeper than that. I pencil things in just so I can take a look at the symmetry again, and it just makes the nostril more visible. And then I'll do some light sanding, knock off any burrs or remaining tooling marks that need to be blended out. I'll speed the video up here as I finish sanding. It's looking pretty good. Got the nostrils shaped up, and now I want to add this little groove along the edge of the upper mandible. So I'm just going to score that groove with my knife. It doesn't have to be very deep. This will just be a guideline for the grinding bit to follow. And kind of fades out as it gets close to the nail. One thing about doing a pair is you can work on the same areas, same tool. There's a few efficiencies being able to go from one to the other with the same tool setup. So now that I have those scored, I'm going to use a small, very small cylindrical ruby and run along the edge of that to open it up just a bit. This is pretty tight work, so you have to do this carefully so that I don't slip and remove a part of that ridge that I want along the lower side of the upper mandible. So I don't have to go very deep here, just enough to cast a shadow. And then I'm going to go from both directions so I have a little rounded shape coming out of that crease, both down and up on either side of it. I've got this part of the video at actual speed because it just needs to be done slowly. Same thing on the drake. And then I'll use a little folded up piece of 250 grit sandpaper where I can get a nice corner that'll go in this groove and sand it smooth after I've done the grinding. Now I do want to carve one additional detail, and that's on the underside of the bill. You can see this little groove that runs on the underside of the bill, and I've got that penciled in. And I'm going to use my little 1/8 inch cylindrical ruby and go in and cut this groove on both sides. And then I'm going to use the end of this bit to kind of take that area down a little bit so it's lower than the surrounding areas and round the edges of that groove. I'm not going to put a lot of detail on the bottom of these bills. These are not fully decorative birds, but I want a little bit of detail here that can contribute to the look of the bird, and I'll use paint to convey the rest of the underside of the bill detail. I'll speed this up to finish. So I'm just working that area in the center to be down a little lower and tie it into the chin area. And then I'm going to use a little sandpaper and just sand that nice and smooth. And we'll be done with the underside. Just a quick look at the underside of the bill. Just a little bit of detail down there to finish the look. I think that's a good place to stop for today. And when we come back in session 3, we'll do a little bit more detailing on the bill, get the eyes installed, and start working on the body. All right, everybody, that's a good place to stop for today. And when we come back, as I said, we'll finish up the heads and start working the bodies. Until next time, Tom Christie signing out. Good carving to you.